So, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a great lunch and stocked up also on coffee, to avoid the sort of post-lunch sort of slump. Now we're on to the next session, which is mobility and travel services. I think in the rise of collaborative consumption, and for those who aren't familiar with the concept of collaborative consumption, that is where people share access to products or services instead of owning them. Mobility and travel services are actually, their rise. They've basically met the challenge by having all these cool services like Drive Now in Germany, and Airbnb is a great example of that. So our next 4 speakers will be talking about the innovative services that they've developed in this domain. And our first speaker is Magnus Kristensen, who's going to talk about the future of Danish public transportation. Which is interesting to me. I thought all Danes were just given by the government bikes when they turn 6 or something, but it's true, right? Okay. Right. So Magnus Kristensen.
Let me put this back on. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me back. I was here last year, and at that time I spoke about another project, and today I'm going to talk about Rejseplanen. I'm called Magnus, and I'm from Sweden, but I live in Denmark, so I'm the second Swede and the second Magnus here today, so there'll be a third one later on. So Social Square is a company that has been in business since 2005, and we work with digital strategy and innovation. We help organizations understand, prototype, and launch businesses and services which are fit for a digital disruptive age. So we like to call our clients challengers because they need to want something in the marketplace. And I think that ties back to some of what the discussions has been earlier today, that organization needs to change in order to do something new and interesting going forward. Today I'm going to speak to you about a project we did together with Rejseplanen, which is a joint. It's almost falling off all the time. Hopefully it stays there. So Rejseplanen is a joint public transportation information service. Basically, they gather all information related to buses, to trains, not to ferries yet, but I think that will come as well in Denmark, and they present that data as information to people who would like to know when their train is leaving and so on and so forth. So that's their type of service. It was launched in '98, and it contained data from all Danish train and bus providers. So the services is used by a lot of people in Denmark. It has 25 million searches per month, and is by far the largest actor in this arena, mainly due to its service layer, but also due to the fact that it's owned by the service data providers, the service providers as such. And their vision is to deliver good information to travelers across all media and units that are relevant to the traveler. So that means that they are on the iPhone and the iPad, on any type of device, on the Windows, on Android, and so on and so forth. They also provide the data to all the information stands in all stations across Denmark. And so people are really dependent on them, and they are at the heart of how people get around when they're not using their bikes in Denmark. And I think that's really an interesting client for us to work with, at least. Just a show of hands here to get you moving after lunch. How many of you are consultants like me? I mean, work for hourly fees and stuff like that? Okay, some of you. How many of you are kind of inside organizations working with service design, service development stuff? Not that many? And the rest of you are at the wrong conference? No. Hopefully there will be something in this tale for all of us and all of you. Basically, we were faced with two challenges when we went into this project. They asked us to help them with their product strategy for the coming years, for the next 3 to 5 years, which is kind of an eternity in this setting. And there's two challenges to that. There's one market-related challenge and one organizational-related challenge. On the market side, it is clear that the digital consumer behavior is changing rapidly. And so in 2010, 23% of the Danish population between 16 and 74 used mobile phones to access the internet. 2 years later, it was 55%. And so this change is obviously something that needs to be taken into account when you build services. It's only one area or aspect of it. The other aspect is that we have a very high penetration of global services. So over half of the Danish population is on Facebook on a pretty regular basis. I think it was approximately 3 million active accounts in the January of 2013. And there is 5.2 million inhabitants in Denmark. And so the development of service layers, of customer experience, of function, flow in these global services affects the user behavior of the Danish user, right? And especially, I think this is especially important if you look at that from an organizational point of view, because obviously Facebook, Google, and Twitter, and these guys has much more resources to put into their interaction design, into the service flows, and so on and so forth. And as a consequence of that, this is a real challenge when you go into providing services to a population and to people who are actually being raised digitally by people with much larger budgets than yourself. So live data, personalization, and all of these trends that are coming along is being, obviously forced or put into place by Facebook, Google, and Twitter. And we need to kind of understand how we could adjust this from an organizational point of view as well. Then if we look at the organizational side of this, this is a service which is owned by 8 different companies. On one hand, you have the Danish railroad provider, the DSB, which is obviously a huge company. On the other hand, you have BAT, which is the local bus provider for the island of Bornholm. And there's discrepancies here, right? There's huge differences in how these organizations act, their budgets, their prioritization, their strategy, their ambitions to build a customer relationship directly with their own brand, and so on and so forth. In addition to these 8 owners, which is obviously also data providers, there's 7 additional data providers. One of them being the traffic authority in Denmark, basically a part of government, which is kind of owning and ruling, so to speak, the infrastructure, the roads, the highways, and so on one hand, and on the other hand, John's Tourist Buses, which is a small private company that has been able to win some of the contracts for bus distribution in the southern parts of Jutland. And so again, you have a huge difference in these companies. They have a very complex, a highly political organization where you have metro, you have train, you have buses, trying to collaborate around delivering a service to the Danish population. And they asked us to create this product strategy, and we thought this is a great idea. We could actually make public enjoy public transportation even more. And we wanted to kind of look at this from different angles. We looked at it as a platform. Could we provide additional third-party services on top of this? We looked at it as a co-creation platform. Could I provide data as well? So we go from having 17 data providers to 5.2 million data providers, because all of us using the services could provide data to the service as well. And so on. I will not go into all of these scenarios, but this is something we worked with the client. And as most of my esteemed colleagues from before lunch, and probably also the rest of the day, have talked about their methods and their tools. We also used market research, user interviews, product reviews, and analysis. But I would like to highlight the fact that we worked with experts as well. We brought in experts from around the world, or especially Denmark, to talk about mobility, to talk about tourism, and to talk about service economies and stuff like that, because it's important in this kind of situation. We'd also brought a lot of time talking with people inside the organization about how they work today, to map out their work processes and so on. And if we look at the user end of side, again, there was a lot of findings. One of them was that there's different types of travelers. And this might not be a surprise to a lot of people, but this service did not cater for this very diverse set of views that we found. First of all, you have the long and planned traveling situation. It's people traveling on a specific date in the near future. It's typically a long journey to a new destination where they haven't been before. It might include a lot of shifts, from a bus to a new train, from one train to another, and so on. And these people need to know, they need to find the right journey. They need to get notifications if this situation is changing. To some extent, I need also to buy additional services on top of the travel. And the switching between trains, but also between different types of transportation, is kind of at the heart of this user. Then you have a usage situation which is the short ad hoc traveling. For example, when I arrived at Tegel this morning, I knew the address where I was going, but I can't really use Rejseplanen to get here. Because it kind of includes a lot of stations, train stations. I need to know what kind of station am I going to in order to be able to go there. See what I mean? So this is more a here and now journey to an unknown destination where I know the address, but I really don't know the kind of different types of journeys I need to take to get there. So here of user behavior, and I need to have a bid on a journey, so to speak. Might also be able to, or need to buy tickets on the run or on the go, so to speak. I need to get updates on when to leave and prepare to change trains and so on. The third situation, data, because all that this service is doing is providing and presenting data to the user, right? So in order to build services that make sense for these three types, and there were even more types of users, you need to have new data or put new requirements on data. For example, real-time data. For example, data about when stuff breaks down, when the plan is not like reality, and so on and so forth. And when we work with these 8 or 17 organizations, we quickly realized that you had a larger organizational issue than a service design, or should I say experience design issue. It would be easier it would be impossible to make these interactions if you didn't have the data. So that's where we started. There was a need for a shared view of what this data quality is. This organization didn't know what data quality is. I didn't know what it was either. But basically, we need to sit down to talk about what does it mean to deliver the correct data at the correct time. How do we handle situations where the train isn't coming, the bus isn't coming, there's a 5-minute delay on one bus compared to another one in Copenhagen at this point in time. And in order to do that, create a common language, we also then needed to have a commitment to that data so that people actually said, okay, I agree to deliver this type of quality and these circumstances. And then we needed a priority of channels. And that means that when the shit hits the fan and stuff breaks down, every single actor here takes care of themselves. So the metro takes care of themselves, DSB takes care of themselves, and so on. And we needed to kind of say, we have to put the user at the center, as we saw in a picture earlier today, and that means that the priority of channels, how do we interact with these people, it's relevant. It's really, really important to do this. And so this is not a project that is completely finished for Rejseplanen yet. This will take some time, obviously, but I have some learning so far that can share some light on how we approach this and what we basically learn from it. First of all, I think you need to be ambitious. And I'm talking to all of us consultants, as well as all of us inside large organizations, but also the rest of you. Whatever you're doing, you need to be ambitious, because there's obviously a friction between the slow organization, the bureaucracy, and the fast-developing market, right? And so that becomes an excuse. Often it becomes an excuse to do anything. So we can't do that. We've never done that before. And I am the first one to acknowledge that there is issues and there's things you need to take care of in a large organization. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's necessary. So you need to tell the client or the boss like it is. You need to be ambitious on their behalf in order to change or improve anything at all. So without that, it's very difficult to move on. Once you've done that, I think you need to dream big, and I think you need to do it small. One of the most important things that I learned is that when we gather all of these different organizations around the table, we need to have a common vision. We need to believe that we could actually enhance this service or even improve it and provide a value for a larger part of the population by doing these changes. So we need to have a buy-in on the vision. But you then need to work in small, nimble projects, iterative ways. I didn't bring the word lean strategy into this. I talked about that last year, but I think my colleague from Finland had a great point in saying that working with hypotheses, testing these, both with the market but with the organization as well, is a really, really important and a strong way to go about having these iterations that helps you adjust your direction in every single day. Okay. I only have 3 left. Strategy and implementation is simultaneous. That's one of my thinking in this type of processes as well. So, although they asked us to make a strategy, and that's what we did, we started the implementation the first day we started working with the strategy. And the reason for that is because we included the people who are supposed to actually do the changes in the process. So once the formal agreement is in place and the management or the board of directors have said that this is what we're going to do, the group that actually are supposed to do this are already set. They're actually waiting for it, right? And so strategy and implementation must be seen as simultaneous work. And you start by by starting to thinking about the strategy as an implementation process. I think you can gain a lot of effectiveness, a lot of less barriers for that implementation, as well as you'll get much more commitment and much more fun out of working with it in that way. And once you run into issues, because obviously you do that all the time, you need to bring proof to the table. So I said before that we did interviews and we did expert interviews and we talked with the organization and all of that. And that's kind of the third truth. So it's me and the client, and then there's proof. And we can talk about the proof and we can say how this is affecting our design process, our business development process, and so on. We can relate to something. And proof makes a lot of sense, you know? It's hard to argue with the fact that if your user's behavior is changing and your product is not, you will lose business. And so you can use, and this is obvious for us, but I think it makes sense to say that also in management consulting, also in organizational processes, also in developing a completely new business, proof, and bringing proof to that table makes a lot of sense. And the last thing is that you should sit down and draw together with these people. So some of them might be engineers, most of them might be economical, masterminds. Some of them might be lawyers, some of them might be designers. By gathering around a round table and a piece of paper to actually draw every single data delivery point, every single responsibility in the organization, makes people understand what it means to change stuff. It helps us negotiate. It helps us access possibilities. It helps us throw away bad suggestions instead of writing 45 pages about it before we do that. So it makes the drawing make sense as well. And that's basically it. I think you should be ambitious. You should dream big and do it small. You should see strategy and implementation as simultaneous processes. It makes sense to bring proof into that process. And if you sit down and draw together, even these complex organizational processes, all of that data sets that needs to be aligned in order to provide a better service for the customer, is a situation which you can overcome and you can deliver great results. So with that, thanks.
Thank you. Great. So, thank you, Magnus.
Thank you.
Back in Punktlichkeitmeisterin mode, one question only for this gentleman here on Rejseplanen.
Yeah.
So.
Or on anything else. Yeah,
anything else? Really? Nobody? Not even Thomas?
No, over here.
Okay,
over here.
There.
Magnus, you talked about bringing in the people who later or who you want to, who need to be involved to implement it. How do you motivate them? Because what we experience a lot of times is that you come in, you talk to the people who need to do this, and they're like, oh well, another group of consultants. Let's see what they do this time. These green hordes will tell us from the outside. They will disappear long after we have to implement this shit. How do you get them motivated again? How do you actually get them passionate about the process, and then also by this, like getting them to actually implement the stuff?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, and I think it depends a lot about the client. I don't think there's a silver bullet to that one. I think one thing is your skill. And I know you, so I know you're skillful, right? And I know that you need to have your craftsmanship in order to be able to kind of facilitate that type of a process. And I think there's been some good suggestions earlier today as well, with both video scenarios as well as bringing in client or going to the client. There's a lot of that stuff. But I think that proof and the business model that we heard from the Norwegian example is also a great example, because at the end of the day, this means money. And so either saving money or making more money makes for good proofs, and which is tied to motivation. Now, motivation could be both personal motivation, so they think that this is fun and the way you work is brilliant, but I also think there's a business motivation. There's some goals in the organization that you could, with fruitful results, tie your project to. So you could actually speak to a larger setting, to a larger strategy, and get your product or project actually to be part of, realizing something that is larger than the project in itself. And at least that has worked for us in the past, and I think that's one way of doing it.
Great, cool.
Okay.
So, yeah, thank you, Magnus.
Thank you.
Now.